All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Additive Snack podcast. I'm your host, Fabian Alefeld, and we have another awesome guest and another awesome episode for you. Today, we're joined by Shawn Zindroski. Shawn is the co-founder and chief operating officer at SNL. He's been in the industry for a very long time. Doesn't look like it. Looks like he just joined and graduated. But believe me when I say he's been in the industry for almost 3 decades. He brings a wealth of knowledge and experience into our industry, and therefore I'm super pumped that we get to talk to him today. We'll learn a little bit about himself and his journey. There's some really fun and unique steps that he went through that I'm pumped to talk about. We will also, of course, hear about SNL, and we'll hear about really what it takes to build a production company in the additive manufacturing space with a lot of creativity at the core of their everyday work. And therefore, without any further delay, Shawn, welcome to Additive Snack.
Thanks, Fabian. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Awesome to have you. And like I mentioned, I think your journey is super impressive. You've been in the industry for a very long time. I think you and I met for the first time in 2018 in LA
That's right.
when you were at a different company. But take us a little bit further back than 2018. How did you get started with additive manufacturing? What pulled you into that field? And yeah, what did that look like?
Yeah, you kind of think back at your career for doing it for a minute, and you start to reflect. And I'm a firm believer in things happen for a reason, right? So when I was in college, I needed a job. I needed
Mm,
to pay the rent, and I was living up in Valencia, where at the time 3D Systems was corporately located. So there was an ad for a model maker, and it was one of the first service bureaus that kind of spun out of 3D Systems up in Valencia. So that's how I got started. It was really out of a job, out of necessity. And, it was super exciting to see it sort of being in school and, being exposed to at that time, the internet and computers were really at their infancy, right? So it was kind of a job out of necessity. And lo and behold, it captured me in to a certain degree. And it's been sort of my career path ever since then. And that was the late 90s.
wow.
So yeah, it's kind of crazy to look back on
Yeah,
after all
late
these
90s.
years.
That's still very early days of additive. Which technologies were you mainly working on then?
You
In the
know,
in LA?
back then it was a big stereolithography thing. It wasn't even called 3D printing. Everyone referred to it as rapid prototyping or stereolithography, right? But it was cool because kind of working, and this is kind of a philosophy we've always upheld in companies that I worked with or managed, or, like today, just running the organization is really understanding all the steps, right? So that was what was interesting about that first exposure was it was working on parts that come out of the machine and sort of prepping them and post-processing them and sort of really building up a good foundational knowledge. And it was great to talk to engineers and companies. Some knew about it, some didn't, right? So it was really the very, very like missionary work, going out and educating people and really starting to implement 3D printing as a part of a design cycle, right? That was a big thing. It was parts were great. You can kind of play with them a little bit. Materials were starting to get a little bit better, but they were very much mock up, you know? But it had a lot of benefits there for design groups and engineers and manufacturers to see their product in real time and to get it, within days instead of months that they were having to wait for traditional processes.
Yeah, truly rapid in those days. Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
big change, yeah, for sure.
yeah.
And then, I mean, you kinda cut your teeth in that space, and like you just mentioned, found yourself in the contract manufacturer space. What made you take the step into entrepreneurship then and start SNL? how did that get started?
Yeah, I mean, after working for that service bureau, I got into sort of the opportunity in working with the automotive concept studios. So there's a little bit that before that led up to SNL. Again, the way I see the career is it's this heavy effort of building foundational knowledge, right? So the automotive space was a very interesting vertical. I love cars. I love being part of building beautiful things that evoke emotional experiences, and show cars and vehicles do that for people, right?
Hmm.
So I had started my own service bureau focused on the automotive concept studios here in Southern California and using additive manufacturing to build out those components. And most of the concept studios are doing stuff very traditionally, clay models, CNC machining, a lot of composites and layups and whatnot. And there was an opportunity to like do a project for a Honda show car, and they were running behind on their deadline, and the stars aligned, and it opened up an opportunity to do a lot of componentry for the interior and exterior of the vehicles that was able to get them across the line for one of these show car builds. And doing having my own company, in the early 2000s, it was great to really be exposed to, the automotive industry as a whole and how additive can really help benefit those specific groups to really expand and save money and save time. And I loved it, right? It's like at the end of the day, you stand back, you look at a show car and you're like, wow,
Hmm.
I was a part of that build. And it's very rewarding. So the creative core has always been there, right? That ever searching sort of experience of cross-sectioning technology and emotion. And I was approached by a startup, a Chinese startup at the time called Faraday Future. And they're like, look, we want to bring you in here and we want to have you build out an additive department for us. So I said, okay, next challenge, right? And I joined them in like 2015 and built out their whole additive department. And it was a very ambitious goal. They wanted, to develop a vehicle and have it on the road within 5 years. Very startup like, ambitious, we're going to conquer the world type stuff. And
No.
I was right there in it, man. I was like, all right, let's do this, So got some great technology in there, help with their subtractive department as well, recognizing not everything should be 3D printed, right? There's still some things that cutting it from a block of foam is much more cost effective and meets certain requirements that just, let's say, additive can't do. So I think it's important to understand the balance, what is a really good fit for additive, what isn't a good fit for additive. And, with the automotive startup, it was, you know, servicing powertrain, battery, design, interiors, exteriors. It was the whole gamut of a vehicle build from the ground up on an electric skateboard, basically. So it was great to not only be a part of what I was doing before with show cars, but it was more experience directly with, all the engineers that are building all the sub-assemblies and packaging and everything that goes into an actual vehicle. So that is what really sort of tipped the scales in my experience and really started to sink in and hit the ground with, what you think versus what and it's been validated, and learning along the way. Continuous learning, I think, and continuous improvement, I think, is a core belief for myself. You
Yeah,
only know
even
you'll
a
yeah,
core piece of additive is continuous iteration and improvement, right?
exactly. Exactly.
Mm.
So back in 2008, you know, I was kind of on the SNL topic. It was me and my wife were, with our young children at the time, we were playing the Nintendo Wii. And at the beginning of it, you create what's called a me. And for anybody that's nostalgic in games, it was kind of the the hip gaming console at the time, right? Very interactive. It was very cool. But anyways, so we had the idea of, or at least we understood sort of what it was doing with these avatars, right? And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, wait a minute, this is really interesting. It's creating 3D content. Everything's in 3D and in gaming. And why couldn't this sort of experiment of developing your own custom avatar, everything from eyebrows to eyes to mouth to beard, hair, all that, translate into 3D printing for customization? So that's kind of the when the idea happened, and it didn't fully get realized, until a bit later, a few years later. But what was interesting is sort of the creative side of thinking of an idea in its infancy and really seeing it through. So developing the web application and all the assets that compile it on the back end, and then ultimately being able for the user that goes on it to be able to create a customized collectible or toy. And that's how SNL kind of got started. And we were doing that on the side. And, my wife was in software, so she was
Okay.
handling a lot of the software stuff. I was on the 3D printing side. So we were juggling this while we were doing our full-time gigs. And it was great in the sense of what the early customization stuff was happening. Everyone was like 3D printing, prototyping, jigs and fixtures, things like that. But
Hmm.
this was a little bit of a different approach.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And I think, from an outsider's perspective, it kind of shows the core DNA of SNL, which is creativity
yeah.
and thinking a bit different. And hearing your story kind of makes sense. The modeling is a very creative process. My first internship was at the prototyping department at BMW. So I did see all those clay models, driver and passenger doors that were machined out of a block of
Yeah.
aluminum, but also additive manufacturing. That's where I saw my first 3D printers back then in a more
Yeah.
environment versus college, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's, you go to school for engineering and you make something pretty on the screen and you throw it over the wall to the fabrication department. And they're like, wait a minute, what did you design here? So I always, again, back to like the early days where you're educating people about the technology. It's really, a big core and sort of philosophy with us here is, we're very customer focused and then application driven, right? It's like,
Mhm.
what is the customer trying to do? What are they trying to accomplish? And what is the best way to get them there with the tools that we have? So yeah, it's, the building blocks of really what we are today. There's some other things that I did beyond that. I got into metals for a few years, which was again something that I had sort of a gap in knowledge on. So I threw myself into that. And that was a great experience working with aerospace companies and going through AS9100 certifications and building a metals facility. It was an experience to say the least, but my heart, my true passion is working with products that evoke emotion. And trust me, there's nothing more beautiful than a rocket propulsion engine, but my passions, I can't ignore what I like to do, right? So
Yeah.
you kind of need
Yeah.
to lead with that.
Yeah. You gotta stick with it. Right. I do want to move on into some of those products that you said, but Nintendo Wii, yes, I remember bowling, golf, super fun games, but I do remember these avatars, and I think you brought some with you as well to kind of
Yeah.
showcase the first SNL products that were ever created.
Yeah. So this is our lovely packaging.
Carbon Kids.
There's
That's
yeah. And basically the story behind it is a couple Midwestern kids living on a farm, see a meteorite crash in the backyard. It hits an old barn. They go inside and there's this magical goo, right? Which was which was the resin turning into a solid.
oh,
And they go on, they create their own character. And there's a couple of the examples of the Carbon Kids. So these are all fully customizable.
that's awesome.
And then there's a female version that was done as well. So you can take a look at that. you can see like the time frame, like the early 2000s, all the skinny jeans,
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
the fashion stuff that was going on at that time.
They were
So
around way too long. I feel like they just died last year. Yeah.
yeah, I know. It's, the little kids we had then now are like young adults, right? So they help school us on what to wear and what not to wear. But
Super cool. And how long were people able to order those?
we had it live for probably about 6 months.
Okay.
And, as we were working with the concept and executing it, we were also pitching it. Right.
Hmm.
So we were out, we had some time to do it and pitching organizations, companies about the idea of customization. And again, sort of stars aligned, and we ended up syncing up with some folks at Disney. And that really opened up sort of an opportunity where they said, "We like what you're doing with the Carbon Kids, can you help us do something here?" And that was essentially the first customer that we got involved with, is working with them, helping them develop product and toy and collectibles. And it was very interesting getting involved with that work, but it happened very organically, right? And it was really at the root of, wow, you guys came up with a really neat idea. Can you help us do something, right? Can you help us create some of this stuff using this technology? And we did. And the irony too is a lot of the stuff that we're getting was coming from gaming data, right?
Hmm.
So that idea of like, oh, you're already doing this in 3D via gaming. We can take that data and work with it and develop assets that can be used for mock-ups and models and whatnot that they were looking.
Almost the other way around, where a lot of projects we see today, especially in the supply chain aspect, is there is no digital data. There's 2D drawings that have to be reverse engineered in order to build up a additive supply chain. It's very
Right.
interesting. But as a creative like yourself, it must have been a very humbling and honorable experience to be working with Disney. I mean, that's the if you think of a creative company, I mean, maybe in 2008, Pixar was probably also on the pinnacle, but Disney
Yeah.
still one of those companies with legacy in the creative process.
Yeah. I mean, it very much speaks to our hearts, right? It's You're in a room with people that are developing content that is forever content, and working on those character sets and being a part of that is something that, we to this day we continue to value. And really, our vision is, to support organizations like that from the creative side. But really the core vision of the company is to build product with additive manufacturing that goes on shelves and gets sold to the public. And we had a vision back then, and now that we're seeing that vision here in the States being realized more and more. And that's, I think, really exciting for us as we're sort of at this next junction of our industry and how it's changing with the times and what people are doing with it as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you rode all the waves, right? You started with prototyping, then you were part of the first custom production part wave, but now you are in the production wave. And I think, it's very important to mention that the most famous additive manufacturing application, I don't have 100% data to prove this out, but I would say it's most likely true, is the Wilson airless basketball. Why? Because it's an application that has seen the world outside of just the additive manufacturing industry. Right? It's
Yep.
touched regular people's lives, and you guys are the production partner of Wilson
That's right.
in that space. So let's talk about that one for
Yeah.
a bit.
Let's do it.
How did that come about? What was the journey like to be, setting up a production and supply chain for a production application that's, has to adhere to very rigorous performance criteria. And how did you guys manage the ramp up curve?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really exciting project for us, right? It's truly groundbreaking and it really challenges traditional design with this really advanced airless structure. But it's not just 3D printing something, right? It's this whole loop of making the ball, then going through a vapor smoothing process, then going through a dyeing process. And it sounds really simple, but there's a lot of stuff in between that. And I think, you know, the aesthetic side of it, people look at it and they're immediately drawn to it, right? It's very aesthetically beautiful. But when they actually bounce it, they're like, do you get that emotional connection, right? They're like, oh my
Yeah,
God, what, I wasn't expecting that. And you're right. It all stems really from the product requirements that allowed it to do it. And our role as a contract manufacturer was really to work with Wilson, work with EOS, work with Dimension, work with ALM. To what was done was sort of this collective of everybody sort of doing their thing. And as Wilson progressed that development and they were looking to do their first production launch, they wanted to bring that all into one route, right? To sort of simplify the supply chain and really building on the core work that a lot of folks have done. And I think that really speaks to the testament of working with companies like Wilson, EOS, and Dimension, where they're enabling the customer to achieve their application goals. But us being, having EOS equipment, having Dimension equipment, working with them to really help transition that knowledge over to us to where we can start really actionably starting and it doesn't come without a lot of work. You know,
sure.
you don't just hit print and, oh, there's, a thing, right? It's a lot of steps that are involved, understanding what has been done, and then what needs to be done and the improvements that need to be made in order to get that ultimate result that you saw in the first production launch earlier this year.
Hmm.
So, it's an extremely rewarding experience to set out to have a very ambitious goal, and then a timeline to deliver a certain amount by a certain date. A lot of weekends, a lot of late nights, a lot of meetings, a lot of collaboration. But I think the fundamental goal was that everybody has stake in the success of what we're trying to do. And it takes a village, right? And if you have those really good fundamental relationships and understanding about what you're trying to do, and you're totally transparent about it, then I think everyone understands, what they need to do, and everyone came together and really helped execute the project. So for us, that was one of the takeaways from sort of working on the contract manufacturing
Hmm.
was the partnerships that sort of evolved from that and the relationships that were built through the process. And I think the product speaks for itself, right?
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. For sure. Super critical. I mean, in additive, it's not just about the printing process. It's about the pre-preparation, the data preparation, operation itself of the equipment, but also, of course, the post-processing steps that make the part as visually and haptically appealing as it is. Maybe take us through a day of production at SNL. What are How does it start? How do you bring an application or a part through these process? And then I'll ask you a few a few questions on what can go wrong. But in a
yeah.
perfect day where you get home and you're satisfied, what does that look like?
Well, it always starts in the morning with, did the machine successfully print? And
Okay.
if you've done everything that you need to do prior to hitting the print button, then you have a very high certainty of success, right?
So you print
It's all,
overnight. So typically your machines run overnight.
Correct. So a typical morning would be, checking on all the printers, making sure that all the production of various jobs or customers have come out successfully. Those go through basically that's the front end of the business. The back end would be all the model making and post processing and what have you. So everything gets moved from a machine level with their travelers to the backside of the business. And then that's where each individual customer or job or task is assigned to a specific individual that runs that through. And, at the end of the day, if there's product ready to be shipped, we ship it. Or if there's situations where we need to find a root cause or, what the visual error might be. We do at every step monitor what the part level is. And that ensures the ability for us to execute delivering the product at the end of the day. So we really, just doing this for as long as I have, you can get very far down the rabbit hole with the project. If you didn't do something early on in the process, all of that time has gone to waste. It's for naught. So you do have to take pause in some of the old school approaches, those Kaizen type of approaches where you're looking at every process, every step, and establishing sort of the right workflow for the particular project. And Wilson being a prime example of that, identifying everything from step to step to step. And once they're approved and they meet all the requirements, they get shipped out to the customer. And we strive for perfection every time. But sometimes the customer doesn't need that. And we try to understand that right away, right? It's like, look, we just need to get a prototype here. Okay, we get it. But the other side of it is this product has to meet all these requirements, from weight to dimensional to haptic to color to, all those things. So usually every group or individuals are part of a team that is executing on the production projects. A lot of the prototyping projects and things that we do where it's like early development, those get managed over multiple individuals that help with that.
Okay. So for a production application, prints run overnight, and then during the day you work on build setup. What about, I'm guessing that you unpack a build and then moves into depowdering, uh, in the Wilson case, smoothing and then dyeing.
That's
Um,
correct.
are all these processes, they're locked in, they're defined, and it's a rinse and repeat, or do you still adjust as you go?
It is definitely a rinse and repeat at this point, and there's still micro adjustments that are being made based off of, things that we're seeing at each individual step. If we see something that is repeating itself, we take pause, record it, and then try to determine root cause. But you're absolutely right. You go through a print level depowdering, making sure that everything is to a specific requirement from an as print level. Going from an as print level, then that goes over to the next stage, which is the vapor smoothing stage, which has a whole entire process for that to ensure that the ball doesn't see any sort of deformation and there's the right type of structure to ensure that we're getting a dimensionally accurate product when it comes out of the vapor smoothing. And then from there, that moves into our DM60 or our DDC process where we're doing the deep dye coloring. All of it has a work instruction and timing for each individual step. And it's just like baking cookies or making, Ben and Jerry's ice cream. There's a recipe for it that we've spent a lot of time in collaboration developing with quite a few folks that are part of the group. So yeah, that's, in a bad day, you've got all kinds of things that can go wrong, but
On a
gotten pretty
bad
good.
day, you had a power outage overnight.
Don't say that, man, but yeah, look, the machines compared to a CNC, don't have the same overall equipment effectiveness. So
Hmm.
the time that the machines are running, they need to be hyper focused on what they're doing. And you really have to do everything you can to help speed that up without sacrificing anything as it relates to the final product. So it's, you know, when people copy, it's sort of a form of flattery. And you can see that there was a lot of people 3D printing, basketballs off their extrusion machines.
Yep.
But, so it shows sort of like how that product really crossed sort of lines, right? It went from like the industry as a whole looking at it to like everybody that is a basketball enthusiast or a sport enthusiast. And it isn't just a airless basketball, right? It's a piece of art. And I think, that first launch and sale of the product is sort of a testament to that. And, you can kind of see what they were selling for. And then what I've seen they've been selling on the secondhand market. It's just like, I can't even believe it myself, but
Yeah.
it was a fun product.
No, it's a compliment to the whole team, really, right? That made this a reality. Now, basketballs are, of course, one small piece of the puzzle that it takes to bring additive manufacturing closer to consumers and closer to a broader range of applications. And there's still a lot of education going on, not just in the late 90s when you started, but we still have to educate a lot around additive. Which industries do you see coming to you for production applications that may have not approached you a few years ago? Do you see an uptick in a certain vertical that is noticeable?
Yeah. I mean, I think, fashion is going through a really big digital transformation right now.
Mm.
So we're seeing, a lot of brands looking at 3D printing to create bespoke products, very advanced geometries, and also really looking at sustainable practices, right? A lot of garments, a lot of fashion gets made in Southeast Asia or Vietnam, even Mexico for that matter.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of unregulation in specific areas of the world that cause a lot of, issues with pollutants and what have you. So I think fashion is a really interesting one that sort of has been intersecting more recently than, others that I would have thought would do more. But certainly fashion is a very big umbrella. We can almost classify wearables as part of fashion and
Yeah.
footwear as part of fashion. So you can see just out there, if you're in the know and you follow our industry, you can kind of see the emergence of some of these things. And a lot of that has been enabled through a lot of the computational engineering that's been going on with latticing, and some really advanced approaches with just construction in general, right? How you're making a whole shoe 3D printed, or how you might be making just the midsole or the insole with a 3D knitted upper, you know? So I think in general, you know, all industries haven't, you know, have been touched in
Mhm.
so many ways with additive. I think other industries are a little bit slower to sort of adapt to it. But yeah, I think fashion's a really exciting one right now, for sure.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah. You make a really good point. Certain industries are slower adopt additive than others. And there's various reasons for it. Some reasons are pure cost reasons, right? I mean, certain industries are more so high quantity, lower cost applications, and fashion, I would argue, most commonly falls into that space, unless you talk about the super high cost pieces like a Hermes or
Mhm.
or products like that. Whereas
Exactly.
you've of course seen the industries that are high value, low volume have adopted additive quite early. What what advice would you give to companies that are looking into additive that kind of believe they're I'm missing the train, I think is the wrong term, but believe that additive could add value to their supply chains, value chains, product portfolios, innovation potential, but don't really know how to get started, how to approach it.
Yeah, I mean, I've been a part of so many of those conversations. And I really do believe that the journey in additive, the approach is with an organization that's interested in is to have an open mind and really just explore the possibilities. Don't be afraid to, run a design of experiments, right?
Hmm.
If you have a product or you want to get into sort of the trend of what's happening with additive and what has been happening with using 3D printing and additive technologies is really, you know, what are we doing? Where's our pain points? How can additive help really address some of those things? And that could be a company that's making a particular consumer product that they have a real big challenge with getting product on the dock and getting it out to customers. So how can additive, you know, help address some of those issues and solve some of those problems? It could be that the effect or the feeling of the product, they're just not getting with traditional because it's a big sea of the same thing. And they want to really differentiate themselves. And how do they do that? Right. And what are the things that they can do to do it? So I think it sort of stems almost on the education side, right? And just understanding what they're doing, understanding some of the pain points that they're going through, and sort of rethinking design in production entirely. It's really like taking a step back and saying, we have the capabilities and the technologies here domestically. Can we actually make product here in the United States, doing it in a completely different way? Product
Mhm.
has been made the same way for hundreds of years, right? Um, there's absolutely no reason why companies shouldn't be embracing this more and doing more of that work to really see how they can integrate this into their process. And I think the companies that have embraced it have seen a lot of great success, but they understood it and they really took the time to really make sure that it was right sized for what they were trying to do. And gradually it ends up in sort of working itself into their workflow, you
Mhm.
know? And a lot of times it always starts with, let's get a 3D printer so we can prototype some stuff, right? But I think when you're dealing with companies like ours, it's like, well, that's great. And, that's the first step. How do we really move the needle? And I think as we have this sort of technology and capability, I think where it's sort of been entrusted to us as professionals in this industry to really push that, and really engage some of those things out of the customers that, it's become very transactional now. And
Mhm.
I see that as having a place, but I also don't think it really moves things forward. You know what I mean? So I think that's one of the biggest things is
Yeah.
really digging in with the customer and understanding their challenges and potentially how can additive help with that.
Yeah. I think 4 or 5 years ago, I gave a presentation that I called From Challenge to Challenger. And it
Mhm.
kind of what you were just talking about is ultimately the same message, right? Finding a challenge that additive can solve rallies people more behind a project and a new technology than a potential opportunity, right? And once you've used additives to alleviate some challenges, which may be in the supply chain space where lead times for applications may be super long, but additive is a bit more rapidly, or because it's a complex assembly and it's quite pricey to source it conventionally, and additive may actually be a cheaper solution, which from time to time is definitely the case. It's definitely a great way to start and a great way to gain experience, because what do you have to do is you have a challenge already anyhow. Try to see if additive is the solution.
Yeah, I
Really,
mean,
really
a
good
lot.
point.
a lot of companies, one of the biggest pitfalls is that, they just rush into something,
Yeah.
and it's like, I don't know anybody that's making product that is rushing into it to their detriment. Right. So I think, there's a lot of considerations around additive, and it opens up a whole nother design language that folks in a lot of industries haven't been exposed to, from part consolidation to light weighting to, all sort of amazing tools. It's today we're at a conjunction of, printing technology, software, and workforce, right? How are those sort of things at their maturity levels? And I think software is way better than it's ever been now, especially with the advancements of AI and what we're seeing from the design world and how they're
Mhm.
incorporating AI as a physical design tool now. And even with the NERF modeling packages that are happening where they can prompt driven design and even starting to create 3D geometry, it's at its infancy. And I see that being a good play and move down the line of how things are going to progress. But yeah, the education is a huge part of it. It's really understanding, how you can use all these things. I mean, there's so many times I've talked to people where they're like, "Oh yeah, I bought N topology and I bought the 3D printer, but I don't know how to get to using this and how to get to here." And it's like, well, wait a minute. You could have worked with someone like us. And then when you're ready to scale into, a machine acquisition, then you sort of move into that when the business case and the responsible side of that moves forward to where you can justify it, right?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's super important to have a production partner like SNL, especially in the early stages. For some companies, it makes sense to invest into equipment to learn the ins and outs when it comes to development. But I think, especially early on, sourcing production via companies like yours makes a lot of sense. Where where do you want the industry to go? Where do you see the industry going right now, especially when it comes to production and productivity? How are you guys preparing yourselves for the next few years when it comes to optimizing production, when it comes to also scalability and growth?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think looking ahead, the trends that really excite me have a lot to do with automation
Mm,
and robotics and a lot of the free form type of manufacturing that I see happening in the space. I think tooling is another really big application where you're creating tooling that has conformal cooling and has more performance benefits than, let's say, a traditional tool. So I
mhm.
think, that's really, really exciting and sort of a trend that I see the market moving more and more toward. Again, I think, there's this sort of resurgence of manufacturing that's happened here domestically in the United
Yeah.
States. And I think that excitement and a lot of how the government is helping support that, I think is allowing these technologies to really gain some traction and really make their way forward into processes that really need to be addressed and need to be improved upon, right? But I also think that we're heading into an age of parts doing more than just being parts. And what I mean by that is, enhancing the material properties that introduce a digital fingerprint for a
Mhm.
component for security and traceability, and really eliminating counterfeit components that actually make their ways into supply chains. We're working on a really interesting project right now where we're embedding nanotechnology into resins that allow you to take a sample of that and biometrically be able to read the data within that nanotechnology that
Wow.
gives you a complete unique fingerprint for each part, that the encryption level is so high, it would take someone years and years and millions of dollars to try and crack that. Again, even with embedded electronics, right? Being able to reduce wire harnesses, be able to embed conductive materials, I think is also going to be a real big game changer for us. Multi-material printing is also a very big thing that I see happening as well. Sort of eliminating those challenges of making multiple tools when you can, essentially leverage additive to build metamaterials and multi-materials in a single configuration. But again, a big thing here, and in Europe, they're doing a better job, is sustainability.
Mhm.
What is the sustainability of additive, and how do we measure that? And I think with EOS, we're doing a really good job at being able to capture some of that right now, which is, amazing. But it's also looking at, recyclability content of the materials, or bio-based chemistries with the materials that have a positive impact on our technology as a manufacturing process, but also is very mindful of the end of life element of that, right? Some of the things that we were doing even in automotive is like, when the car is finished and it's the end of the life, could the screens in the car be repurposed as displays for, a third world nation where they need to start to get into the digital age, and just looking at different things in that way, I think additive has an opportunity to really make an impact on that.
The
So yeah,
repurpose is a good. I feel like these screens go into every international airplane that I'm on.
yeah,
They
a
seem
little
like
bit,
they're 20 years old,
little
but
bit staticky, you know, uh, but
yeah, exactly. Still a forced touch display. But yeah, no, those are really good points. I mean, it's kind of interesting. All these aspects that you mentioned have a lot to do with also advancing materials and more peripheral aspects of the additive manufacturing process to leverage the technology even better, right? And also getting an even more in-depth understanding of the full value chain of additive manufacturing parts that I think even in conventional manufacturing we oftentimes don't really understand. And yeah, I think current EU regulation that is hitting is definitely enabling and incentivizing the move into understanding these life cycles way better than we did before.
yeah, I mean, it's like the total value chain, right? It's like, look, we have a technology that we know we are able to make the parts at a cost point that makes sense to the customer, but it also has all these additive, using the word additive, it has all these additive benefits,
Yeah.
which, makes a bigger business case to organizations that are really measuring their carbon footprint. And the goal here is to responsibly scale. I think in general, with all the SPACs and all the venture capitalist money that was pumped into the industry, that the investors sort of got the best of it, where they sort of, created these super ballooned evaluations. And it was very, what's the right word? Driven by like, when am I going to get a return on my money?
Mm,
And it's really a marathon, right?
mhm,
You have to put in this work for the right customers to really help scale and build out what we can do, and or what like a machine tool manufacturer can do. So I think scaling responsibly, finding the right customers with the right applications where the business case makes sense. Our goal is to grow 3 to 4 to 5 times the size that we're currently at. We're very ambitious. We see a big potential there, and you know kind of getting back to basics and knowing our customers, working with our customers, understanding what they want. And people, at the end of the day, when you do business, you're working with a person. You're not working with an algorithm and some website that you upload files to. So I think, we're very traditional in that sense, but we do recognize that there's always room for improvements. As platforms get bigger and materials get faster and workforce gets more educated, All of those things are very important to the growth strategy of the industry. So we can do more with the technology, get more out of our investment, and really impact industries, individuals, personalities, brands, with what we're doing for our careers, and that's really helping create experiences and connections with, product and people.
Yeah. It seems like working with SNL as a production company gives you both ends of the spectrum. It gives you production capabilities, but also creativity. And it gives you professionalism, but also personal interactions with experts that have been in the industry for a very long time. And
Yeah,
that I think
yeah,
is a very unique combination that's definitely needs to be highlighted and hopefully, and I have no doubt about it, can grow to 5x at least
yeah.
over the course of the next few years.
Well, it's not going to be from a lack of trying. I'll tell you that.
For sure not. For sure not.
Yeah,
And you've had a really good run and you've had a long run. So I'm pretty certain that this is actually still only the beginning of what we'll see from you. So Shawn, thanks
absolutely.
for being on the Additive Snack podcast today. It was awesome to get such a experienced person on the show and have you share your history with us, but also your perspective on the future. So it was awesome to have you. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an absolute pleasure. I love sitting down and talking about our field, and, really excited to see where it's headed, and very confident that we're going to see amazing things from a lot of different folks in the coming years.
For sure. And yeah, also thank you out there for tuning in today. Like Shawn just said, there is a lot of amazing stories out there that we can all learn from. And I hope that one place for you to learn from experts out in the industry is this podcast. So if you enjoyed the show, please give us a thumbs up on your favorite podcast platform, share this episode, and also leave a comment on YouTube or shoot us an email at additive.snack@eos-na.com. This was the Additive Snack podcast. I'm your host, Fabian Alefeld, and I will see you next time.